What if the thing you've been running from is the only thing that can ever set you free? Not success, not validation, not discipline, but the part of you you avoid the most. You've been taught to escape your darkness, to distract yourself when it gets loud, to stay positive when something feels off, to move forward without ever looking back. And for a while, that works. You build a life, you create momentum. You convince yourself you've outgrown whatever used to haunt you. But something doesn't sit right. There are moments, quiet ones, where the noise fades and something else rises. A tension you can't explain. A heaviness that doesn't belong to the present. A reaction that feels too strong for what just happened. That's not random. That's unfinished. The truth is simple but brutal. You are not running from the past. You are running from what you created to survive it. The anger you buried. The fear you never named. The version of yourself you had to become just to get through it. Those didn't disappear. They adapted. They evolved. They became something else. Monsters. Not imaginary ones, but psychological constructs. Built slowly out of avoidance, suppression, and unresolved moments. Every time you ignored something you felt. Every time you chose silence over confrontation. Every time you moved on without understanding, you didn't heal. You built, layer by layer, reaction by reaction, until what once was a moment became a pattern. And that pattern became something that now lives inside you. Something that shapes how you think, how you react, how you see yourself. And here's the part most people never admit. Those monsters don't chase you, they wait. They wait for the right moment, a stressful situation, a vulnerable conversation, a moment of uncertainty. And suddenly, you're not responding as you. You're responding as something older, something deeper, something you never fully faced. So you keep running. You change environments. You change routines. You chase better habits. But no matter how far you go, you carry the same internal landscape with you. Because the problem was never outside. It was constructed within. And this is where everything flips. Because the goal was never to eliminate that darkness. That's impossible. The goal was to understand it, to confront it, to walk directly into it without flinching. Not emotionally, strategically, because what you're dealing with is not chaos. It's structure, your structure, built unconsciously over years, and anything that is built can be rebuilt, but only if you're willing to do something most people avoid their entire lives. Turn around and walk toward it. This is not about healing in the way you've been taught. This is not about soft comfort or passive acceptance. This is about a deliberate descent. A conscious decision to enter the very space you've been avoiding, to look directly at what you've created, without distraction, without denial, without escape. Because power does not come from avoiding your darkness. It comes from mastering it, from understanding how it works, why it exists, what it's protecting, and what it's costing you. You don't become free by outrunning your demons. You become free the moment you stop running and start hunting them. This is where autonomy begins, not in control of your environment, but in control of your internal world. The part of you that no one else sees, but dictates everything you do. So the question is not, do you have darkness within you? That's already answered. The real question is, are you going to keep pretending it's not there, or are you finally ready to face it and take it apart piece by piece? Because the moment you choose to descend, everything changes. Not instantly, but permanently. And from that descent, you don't come back the same. You come back in control. See Chapter 1, The Architect of the Abyss. There's a quiet kind of damage that doesn't look like destruction. It looks like stagnation. You wake up, you function, you move through your day. Nothing is falling apart, but nothing is truly moving forward either. And the worst part, you can't explain why, because on the surface, everything seems fine. You're disciplined enough, you're aware enough, you're trying. But underneath that surface, there's friction. Subtle, constant, unresolved. You start something, then hesitate. You make a decision, then doubt it. You move forward, then pull back. not because you lack ability, but because something inside you is resisting. That resistance is not random. It's constructed. Every time you ignored a failure, instead of understanding it, every time you avoided discomfort, instead of processing it, every time you distracted yourself, instead of confronting something real, you didn't eliminate the problem. You deferred it, and deferral doesn't erase anything. It builds pressure. Your mind is not passive. It doesn't just store unresolved experiences. It organizes them. It connects them. It builds around them. Like an architect working in silence, designing structures you don't even realize exist. And over time, those structures become something else. Not memories. Monsters, not because they are dramatic, but because they are undefined. They exist without clarity, without names, without boundaries. And anything undefined feels bigger than it actually is. You feel anxiety, but don't know why. You feel hesitation, but can't trace it. You feel fear, but it doesn't match the situation. Because what you're reacting to is not the present moment. It's the structure behind it. A structure built from everything you chose not to face. This is the abyss, not some external darkness, but an internal accumulation. A space inside you, filled with unfinished experiences, unanswered questions, unprocessed emotions, unacknowledged truths. And here's the shift most people never make. They treat this chaos as an accident, something that happened to them, something outside their control. But it's not. It's construction, your construction. Not intentionally, not consciously, but consistently, through avoidance, through delay, through choosing comfort over clarity, again and again. And once you see it that way, something changes. Because if it was built, it can be deconstructed. But you can't dismantle something you refuse to acknowledge. You can't solve something you keep labeling as random. You can't take control of something you still believe is happening to you instead of through you. This is where responsibility enters. Not blame, responsibility. Understanding that while you didn't choose every experience, you did shape how those experiences settled inside you. You did decide what to confront and what to avoid. You did contribute to the current state of your internal world, and that realization is uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of helplessness. It removes the comfort of saying, "This is just how I am," because now you see the patterns. You see how certain reactions repeat, how certain fears persist, how certain limitations don't actually belong to your current reality. You see the architecture, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is the beginning of real awareness, not surface-level understanding, structural clarity. You start recognizing where things came from, why certain thoughts appear, why certain situations trigger you, why certain behaviors feel automatic. And suddenly what once felt like chaos starts to look like a system. A flawed one, but a system. And systems can be changed, but only if you stop pretending they are not yours. Because the moment you accept that you are the architect, you stop being a victim of your internal world and start becoming its designer, not instantly, not easily, but intentionally. And that intention is what separates someone who stays trapped in their own patterns from someone who begins to dismantle them. Because now, you're not just reacting to your mind. You're observing it, questioning it, understanding it. And that understanding is the first crack in the structure. Because once you know how something was built, you also know it can be taken apart. Next, we expose the most dangerous illusion of all, the comfort that keeps you exactly where you are while convincing you you're safe. Chapter 2, The Illusion of Safety. There's a version of safety that feels warm, but slowly suffocates you. It doesn't look like danger. It doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like comfort. You stay where things are familiar. You repeat patterns that don't challenge you. You tell yourself, at least this is manageable. And on the surface, it makes sense. Why step into discomfort when you can stay in control? Why face uncertainty when you can predict your pain? But that's the trap, because what you call safety is often just controlled suffering. You're not free from pain, you've just learned how to contain it. You've built routines around it, adjusted your expectations, lowered your standards just enough to avoid friction. And over time, something subtle happens. You stop growing, not dramatically, gradually, quietly. You stop taking risks that could change your life. You avoid conversations that might disrupt your comfort. You settle into a version of yourself that feels stable but isn't expanding. And here's the part that most people don't realize. This state feels safe because it protects your identity. If you never try, you never fail. If you never confront, you never lose control. If you never question, you never have to rebuild, so you stay. Not because it's good for you, but because it's predictable. This is where victimhood becomes dangerous, not in an obvious way, in a subtle, sophisticated way. It gives you an explanation for everything, why things didn't work, why you didn't move forward, why you feel stuck. And those explanations feel justified. They feel real because something did happen. Something did affect you. But here's the shift. Acknowledging what happened and identifying with it are two completely different things. When you start identifying with your past pain, it becomes your reference point. Your decisions filter through it. Your expectations align with it. Your actions reinforce it. And without realizing it, you start living in a loop. A loop that feels like protection, but is actually limitation. Because staying in that space has a cost. Not emotional, metabolic. Your brain is constantly running processes in the background, monitoring, avoiding, adjusting, trying to keep you within the boundaries of what feels safe. And that takes energy, a lot of it. Energy that could have been used to create, to think clearly, to move forward. Instead, it's being used to maintain a version of you that doesn't get challenged. You feel tired without doing much. You feel stuck without knowing why. You feel unmotivated, even when you want more. That's not laziness. That's misdirected energy, because part of you is working constantly to keep you from stepping outside your comfort zone. And the longer you stay there, the stronger that resistance becomes. This is where the illusion fully sets in. You start believing that staying where you are is safer than exploring what's beneath. But it's not, because stagnation is not neutral. It's decay. When you don't move, you don't stay the same. You lose sharpness. You lose clarity. You lose momentum. Slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you've been standing still for far too long. And by then, the idea of moving becomes even more difficult. This is why most people never confront their internal darkness. Not because they can't, but because staying where they are feels easier. But ease is deceptive, because what feels easier now often becomes heavier later. So here's the realization that changes everything. You are not safe where you are just familiar. And familiarity is not protection. It's repetition. The real risk is not going deeper. It's staying exactly where you are. Because the longer you avoid descent, the more control your unresolved patterns gain. So the question becomes simple. Not, is this comfortable? But, is this costing me more than I'm willing to admit? Because once you see the cost, comfort stops feeling safe. It starts feeling like a cage. And that's the moment where everything shifts, from passive existence to intentional action. Because now you understand something most people don't. The way out is not upward, it's inward. Next, we stop running, we stop maintaining, we stop pretending, and we begin something far more dangerous and far more powerful. A deliberate descent into everything you've been avoiding, not as prey, but as the hunter. Chapter 3, the strategic descent. Up until now, you've been reacting. Avoiding when it feels too heavy, distracting when it gets too loud, pushing forward when something pulls you back. You've been moving, but not in control, because something unseen has been setting the direction. But this is where the pattern breaks. Not by escaping, not by numbing, but by choosing something most people will never willingly do. Descent, not a collapse. not losing control, a decision. A calculated movement into the very space you've been avoiding. Because right now, your fears hunt you. They show up unexpectedly. They dictate your reactions. They control your limits. You don't choose when they appear. You respond when they do. That's not power, that's exposure. Strategic descent flips that entirely. You stop waiting for your fears to surface. You go looking for them, not emotionally, systematically. You begin by identifying what you've been avoiding the most, not the obvious things, the subtle ones, the conversations you keep postponing, the thoughts you interrupt before they fully form, the memories you quickly move past. Those are entry points, not threats. Signals. Instead of pushing them away, you stay. You let the thought complete itself. You let the discomfort surface fully. You resist the urge to escape, because avoidance feeds ambiguity, and ambiguity makes everything feel bigger than it is. Once you face something directly, it starts to shrink, not because it disappears, but because it becomes defined, and definition is power. This is where the siege begins, not against the world, against the layers you've built to protect yourself. Your ego is not your enemy, but it is your defense system. It exists to maintain stability, to keep your identity intact, to prevent disruption. And that's exactly why it resists dissent, because dissent threatens everything it has constructed. So it pushes back, it creates doubt, it amplifies fear, it tells you this isn't necessary. And if you're not aware, you'll listen, you'll retreat, you'll return to comfort. But if you stay, something different happens. You begin to see the structure of your resistance, how certain thoughts try to redirect you, how certain emotions try to overwhelm you, how certain patterns try to pull you back. And instead of reacting, you observe. That observation is control, because now you're not inside the pattern. You're watching it, and once you can watch something, you can dismantle it. This is where naming becomes critical, because what you don't name, you can't confront. Vague fear is powerful. Specific fear is manageable. So you start labeling. This is fear of failure. This is fear of rejection. This is avoidance rooted in past experience. You strip away the mystery. You remove the exaggeration. You see it for what it is. And the moment you do, it loses its edge, because most of your fear was never about the present. It was about unresolved past interpretations. Now, something shifts. You're no longer being chased. You're tracking. You recognize patterns before they take over. You see reactions forming before they happen. You understand the triggers before they escalate, and that awareness gives you space. A gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap you choose, not based on habit, not based on fear, but based on intention. This is what dissent actually gives you. Not answers, control. Control over your reactions. Control over your patterns. Control over how deeply something affects you. And that control is not loud. It's quiet, precise. Because you're no longer trying to avoid discomfort. You're navigating it, and that changes everything. You don't get overwhelmed as easily. You don't get pulled into the same loops. You don't get controlled by the same triggers, because you've seen them, understood them, faced them. And once something has been fully faced, it stops holding the same power. This is the turning point. From being managed by your internal world to managing it, not perfectly, but deliberately. And from this place, you're ready for something deeper, because confronting your darkness is not the end. It's the beginning of transformation, where what once held you back becomes the very thing that stabilizes you. Next, we step into that transformation, where confrontation stops being painful and starts becoming powerful, where what you feared becomes what you build on. Chapter 4, The Alchemy of Confrontation. There's a moment, subtle, almost quiet, where something inside you stops resisting. Not because the fear disappears, not because the discomfort fades, but because you've stayed with it long enough. And for the first time, it doesn't feel like chaos anymore. It feels structured. This is where confrontation changes form. It stops being something you endure and starts becoming something you use. Because up until now, everything you avoided felt overwhelming. Too heavy, too complex, too undefined. But the moment you face it directly, it begins to organize itself. What once felt like a storm becomes patterns. What once felt like noise becomes signals. What once felt like too much becomes specific. And specificity is where power begins. Because now, you're not dealing with an abstract weight. You're dealing with identifiable pieces. A belief that doesn't hold anymore. A reaction that came from a different version of you. A fear that no longer matches your current reality. And once you see those pieces clearly, you can work with them. This is the alchemy. Not turning pain into something positive, but turning confusion into clarity. Because confusion traps you. Clarity frees you. Think about it. When something is unclear, you hesitate. When something is defined, you act. And that's exactly what confrontation gives you. Definition. You start understanding why you react the way you do, not in a surface-level way, but structurally. You see how a past experience created a belief, how that belief shaped a pattern, how that pattern now influences your behavior. And suddenly what felt like this is just how I am becomes this is something I can change. That shift is everything. Because now, you're no longer stuck inside the experience. You're outside it, observing it, reconstructing it. And this is where transformation actually happens. Not through motivation, not through forcing yourself to be different, but through understanding something so clearly that it can no longer control you the same way. Your suppressed trauma, the thing you spent years avoiding, starts to lose its emotional charge. Not because it didn't matter, but because it's no longer undefined. You've seen it, you've traced it, you've understood it, and understanding removes distortion. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable. What once felt personal now feels contextual. What once felt permanent now feels changeable. This is where your internal structure begins to rebuild, not on avoidance, not on distraction, but on awareness. You start replacing reactions with decisions. You start replacing patterns with choices. You start replacing assumptions with clarity. And over time, something solid forms, not confidence in the loud sense, but stability, a grounded sense of self that doesn't get shaken as easily. Because it's not built on avoiding reality. It's built on facing it. This is where your past stops being a liability and starts becoming material. Material for strength, material for understanding, material for building something stronger than what existed before. Because now, you're not just someone who went through something, you're someone who processed it. And that difference is massive. One version of you reacts, the other responds. One version gets overwhelmed, the other navigates. One version avoids, the other confronts. And that shifter from reaction to response is where real control begins. This is the foundation of structural integrity. Not perfection, not emotional numbness, but alignment, where what you think, feel, and do are no longer in conflict because nothing is being suppressed anymore. Nothing is being ignored. Nothing is operating in the background without your awareness. Everything is in the open. And when everything is in the open, nothing controls you from the shadows. This is what most people misunderstand. They think confronting their darkness will break them. But what actually breaks you is carrying it without understanding it. Confrontation doesn't weaken you, it reorganizes you. It takes what was scattered and makes it usable. And once it becomes usable, it becomes strength. Not borrowed strength, not temporary confidence, but something built. Something that doesn't collapse under pressure because it was forged inside it. And from that place, you don't just handle life differently. You build differently. You build decisions that last. You build relationships that are real. You build a version of yourself that doesn't need constant correction, because it's no longer built on avoidance. It's built on truth, and once your foundation is truth, everything above it becomes stronger. This is the alchemy, not escaping your past, but transforming it into something that finally works for you. And from here, you step into the final stage, where everything you've faced, everything you've understood, everything you've rebuilt, comes together. Not as fragments, but as a whole. Next, we reach that point, where you are no longer divided, no longer reacting, no longer avoiding, but fully integrated. And from that integration comes something most people never experience: real autonomy. Chapter 5, Autonomy through Integration. At the end of all this, something unexpected happens. There is no dramatic breakthrough, no sudden transformation, no moment where everything feels perfect. Instead, there is silence, not emptiness. Clarity. For the first time, your mind is not pulling you in different directions. There's no internal argument, no hidden resistance, no quiet tension running underneath everything you do, just alignment. Because what you once avoided, you've now faced. What once controlled you, you've now understood. What once felt like chaos now feels like structure. This is integration, not removing your darkness, but absorbing it. You're no longer trying to be only one version of yourself. Not just calm, not just strong, not just composed. You're complete. You have access to your intensity without losing control. You have access to your depth without getting lost in it. You have access to your past without being defined by it. Nothing is rejected. Nothing is hidden. Nothing is operating outside your awareness. And because of that, nothing inside you is fighting for control anymore. This is where autonomy begins, not external freedom, internal sovereignty. The ability to move through life without being unconsciously driven by old patterns, without reacting to things that don't deserve your reaction, without being pulled back into versions of yourself that no longer exist. You don't need constant validation. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need everything to go your way, because your stability doesn't come from the outside anymore. It comes from the fact that you've seen everything within you and nothing there scares you the same way. This creates a different kind of presence. You don't rush decisions. You don't overreact to situations. You don't collapse under pressure, not because you're forcing yourself to stay calm, but because nothing inside you is amplifying the moment unnecessarily. Your reactions match reality, not your history, and that alone changes everything. People feel it, not in what you say, but in how you are. There's a weight to your presence, not heavy, grounded. You don't get easily influenced. You don't get easily manipulated. You don't get easily shaken, because there's no internal instability left to exploit. You've already confronted your fears. You've already faced your weaknesses. You've already dismantled your illusions, so nothing external hits you with the same intensity. This is what makes someone truly independent, not isolation, not detachment from the world, but the ability to engage with it without losing yourself in it, because now you are not reacting to life. You are responding to it, and that difference is everything. You choose your direction. You choose your reactions. You choose your boundaries, not based on fear, not based on past conditioning, but based on clarity. This is what most people are chasing without realizing it. Not success, not recognition, control, not over others, over themselves. And the only way to reach that is through everything you just faced. Because autonomy is not given. It's built through confrontation, built through understanding, built through integration. And once it's built, it doesn't disappear. It becomes your default. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop drifting between versions of who you think you should be. You become consistent, not rigid, rooted, and from that place, you can finally move forward. Not as someone trying to fix themselves, but as someone who understands themselves completely. This is what it means to reclaim your spirit, not by escaping your darkness, but by walking through it and coming out with something stronger. Not a new identity, a real one, and once you have that, there's nothing left to chase. Because you're no longer searching for control. You are it.